for.
Finding homes and cars submerged. Here, our drone shows that same neighborhood from above.
On Tuesday, the 11th of August, a line of storms came out of eastern Iowa and crossed into Indiana. It was a derecho. Over 1 million customers lost power that day. Then it rained for 4 more days. Parts of Indiana took more than 11 inches in 2 days. In Newcastle, it was more than 11 inches in 32 hours, which the Weather Service classified as a 1 in 1,000-year rainfall event. That is not a figure of speech. That is a probability. The White River crested at Anderson at 24.9 feet. That beat the record set in the Great Flood of 1913. At Noblesville, it crested at 24.6, which was also a record. On Thursday, the 13th, the governor of Indiana declared a statewide disaster emergency. On Saturday, the 15th, the president signed an emergency declaration. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, on a county road at about 9 at night, a 61-year-old Catholic priest came to a barricade with a sheriff's deputy standing next to it, and he drove around it. He had driven that road for 30 years. He said so out loud to the deputy before he did it. They found his car the next morning, 3/4 of a mile downstream, on its side against a fence line, and they found him 20 yards past it in the same fence. He was not breathing for 19 minutes. What Father Dale says he was asked, on the other side, was not whether he believed. It was not whether he had saved his parish. It was a question about the people who had stopped coming, and he has been sitting with it for 6 days, and he cannot get to the end of it. Before he starts, this is a reconstruction. The storms, the rainfall records, the river crests, the deaths, the declarations, and the footage are real, and every one of them is sourced on screen. The man telling it is not a real person. No real victim of this flood is shown, quoted, or identified as him.
Is it on? There's no light on it, okay? It says it's recording. I'll take your word for it. Good morning. It's Saturday. It's about 10:30, and I'm sitting at a folding table in the parish hall, which is the only room on this property that doesn't currently smell like a pond. My sister-in-law is holding the phone. She drove up from Cincinnati on Wednesday, and she has not left. And every time I say I'm fine, she looks at me like I've said something in another language. Nobody asked me to do this. There's no reporter here. There's no diocesan communications person. And I want to say up front that the Archdiocese doesn't know I'm doing it. If somebody up there watches this and has a problem with it, that's fair, and they can call me before anything else. One thing, because I know what these things sound like. I did not come back a better man. I've sat with, I don't know, a couple hundred people who nearly died. I know exactly how the story's supposed to go. Guy dies, guy comes back, and now he's peaceful and he's certain and he forgives everybody and he finally knows why he's here. That did not happen to me. I'm the same crabby 61-year-old I was on the 10th. Wednesday I snapped at a FEMA kid who was doing his job perfectly well. I haven't apologized, and I'm not going to sit here and promise you I will. One thing changed. I found out what I spent 34 years not doing. That's it. That's the whole thing. My name's Dale. Father Dale if you want, but around here it's mostly just Dale with a father in front of it when there's company. I'm 61, ordained in 1992, so this is year 34. Now I've got to tell you what kind of parish this is, or the rest of it won't make any sense, and you'll think this is a story about a flood. It isn't a story about a flood. I'm not a downtown priest. I've never been a downtown priest. This is a county parish. When I got here in 92, there were 410 registered households. The church itself went up in 1891, brick, and there's a cornerstone with the name of a guy on it whose great-great-granddaughter still sat in the 4th pew until about 2 years ago. 410 households. I want you to hold on to that number because I'm going to give you the other one in a minute, and I'd rather you hear it from me than do the math yourself while I'm talking. I'll tell you what this place was. Sunday morning, 2 masses, the 8 and the 10:30. Fish fry every Friday in Lent, and I mean the whole town came, not just Catholics. There was a men's club that met in this room on Tuesdays and argued about the parking lot for 11 years. There was a grade school until 98. There was a bus that went to the state fair, and it worked, not because of me. It worked because there were 3 factories inside 20 minutes of this door, and everybody's dad worked at one of them. The first one closed in 99. The second one went to Mexico in 2004, and the third one is still there, but it runs with about a fifth of the people because the line's automated now. And I want to be clear that I'm not making a political point. I'm telling you why the pews emptied, and the answer is not that people lost their faith. The answer is that their kids had to move to Indianapolis to get work, and then their kids' kids were born in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is an hour and 10 minutes each way. I've heard every explanation there is for why the American church is emptying out: the culture, the phones, the scandals, and God knows the scandals. I've sat through 3 different workshops on evangelization in the digital age, and every one of them was about how to be more compelling. Nobody ever stood up at one of those and said the plant closed, so the other number, we're at 91 registered households. Sunday attendance runs between 40 and 60 depending on the weather, and I mean that literally. The weather moves it by 20. The 8 o'clock got folded into the 10:30 in 2019. The men's club has 4 members, and they meet at Denny's now because it's warmer. And I want to say something that's going to sound bitter and isn't. Those 91 households are the best people I have ever known. Ruth Vandermeer is 86 years old and has done the altar linens every week since Reagan. There's a family that drives in from 2 counties over because the mother wants her boys to see a church that isn't a gymnasium. When the roof went in 2018, 91 households raised $194,000, and I know what those people's houses look like inside. So that's the parish. 91 households, an 1891 brick building, a roof I begged for, and a river a mile and a half east that has never once been a problem in 34 years. Now here's the part I've never said out loud to anybody, and I'm going to say it before I get into the rest of it, because if I don't say it now, I'll arrange the rest of the story so I never have to. I know the names of everyone who comes, all of them, every single one of the 40 to 60. I know Ruth's linens. I know whose knee is bad. I know which kid is going to Purdue and which one didn't get in. I could sit here and give you all 91 households by name and their kids and where the kids went. And 2.5 years ago, I sat down at this exact table and started building the case to keep this church open. And I pulled the registers going back to 1992 so I could show the archdiocese the trend line. And I found that I could not tell you who left. I could tell you the number I've got to the household. 410 down to 91 over 34 years, and I could show you the slope of it on a chart, and I did. I made the chart. It's in a binder in that office right now. But if you'd asked me to name the 319, not all of them, just say 20 of them, just 20, and tell you when each one stopped coming and what was going on in their life the month they stopped, I could not have done it. Not for 20. I'd have gotten maybe 5, and 4 of those 5 were funerals, which don't count because a funeral isn't somebody leaving. 34 years in one town, and the only people I can account for are the ones who kept showing up. That's what I found out on the other side. I want to be honest that I'd already found it out at this table 2.5 years ago in about 90 seconds, and then I closed the binder and went and did something else, and I did not think about it again until the night of the 15th. That's the difference. It's not that I learned something new. It's that I'd already known it and put it down.
Let's stop on the water for a minute, because it isn't background, and because most people outside the Midwest did not hear about this at all. 7 people died. I am going to give you them the way the counties gave them, because a list is more honest than a total. A boy in Jennings County killed on the 11th when a tree came down on the house. A woman in Portage killed the same day in a house explosion. A person in Gary struck by roofing material. A man in LaPorte County killed in a crash on US 30 on the 12th. In Perry County, Ohio, a person having a medical emergency died because the flooded roads stopped the responders from getting there. And in Delaware County, 2 bodies, one found on the 14th and one on the 15th. One of them a person who tried to drive through the water, and one of them a person who went into the Mississippi River on the 12th and did not come out. That last pair is the reason this story exists, and I want to be very careful about what I am telling you. The man you are about to hear is not either of them. He is a composed character. But he did the same thing, and he is the reason we can talk about it at all. because the people who actually did it are not here. The rescues. The Indianapolis Fire Department pulled out 95 people and 45 pets. About 400 people were evacuated in northern Indianapolis. Delaware County evacuated more than 350 by the 15th. On the night of the 16th, a levee gave way in Morgan County and 11 more people had to be taken out. The mayor of Indianapolis said the city was seeing its most severe flooding in more than 30 years. And it is not over. As of yesterday, 9 days after the derecho, tens of thousands of people in Indiana still had no power. Some of them are being told it will be the 25th. If this is worth your time, take 2 seconds to subscribe and hit the bell. That's the only thing I'll ask you for. The rest of it, he tells himself.
The letter came in February of 2024. It isn't a letter that says you're closing. That's not how it works, and I want to be fair about that, because I've heard people describe this process like a guy in a black car pulls up and padlocks the door, and it isn't that. It's a letter that says the Archdiocese is entering a planning process and that every parish will be assessed, and it lists the criteria: sacramental activity, mass attendance trend, financial viability, including deferred maintenance, proximity to neighboring worship sites, availability of clergy. And then it says the process is consultative and that pastors will be invited to submit information. Invited to submit information. I've read that sentence probably 400 times. It's a completely reasonable sentence. Somebody in an office wrote it carefully and they were being decent when they wrote it. And what it means when it lands on your desk is, here is a form and your building is on it. And your job now is to fill in the boxes better than the parish 11 miles up the road fills in theirs. Because that's the part nobody says. It's not you against the Archdiocese. It's you against Saint somebody up the road who I've known for 20 years and who is also a good priest and who also has a roof. So I got to work. And I'm going to walk you through what I actually did with 2.5 years because it matters. And because I think a lot of people listening to this have done the equivalent at their job and will recognize every single step. First, I built the attendance data October count, which is the standard 4 Sundays, head count at every Mass. I did it honest. I'll tell you flat out that padding happens, not lying exactly, just counting generously, counting the funeral, counting Christmas into the average. I didn't do it. I put down 44 and 49 and 41 and 62, and the 62 was a baptism, and I flagged it as a baptism. I've been proud of that for 2 years, and I want to look at that pride for a second because it's a strange thing to be proud of. What I'm proud of is that I gave an accurate number to a process that was going to use the number to close my church. That's not integrity, that's compliance with good handwriting. Then the finances. We're solvent. 91 households and we are solvent, which I'd like on my headstone. No debt on the roof. 11,000 in reserve. Building assessed at deferred maintenance of about 240,000, which is the tuck pointing and the boiler is the thing that kills you. Then the sacramental numbers, and this is where you lose, and everybody knows you lose here. Baptisms 3 and 23, 1 and 24. Weddings 0, 0, and 1 and 22, and that was a couple from Fort Wayne who wanted the brick. Funerals 9, 11, 14. You can see the shape of that. Everybody can see the shape of that. 14 funerals and 1 baptism is a sentence in itself, and I didn't need a spreadsheet to read it. Then the case. And here's where I put the real work. I wrote 31 pages. I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not proud of it. 31 pages on why this building should stay open. I had the county's projected growth corridor. There's a subdivision going in south of here, 90 lots, and I made a whole argument about it. I had the drive time analysis because if you close us, the nearest church is 26 minutes, and there are 11 households here with no car in the driveway. I had a photograph of the cornerstone. I had letters. I got 41 letters from parishioners, and I helped some of them write theirs, which I'm also not proud of. And I had a section, I want to tell you about this section. I had a section called Reconnection Potential. That's my phrase. I made it up. What it said was that there are hundreds of formerly registered households in this zip code who are still nominally Catholic, and that a parish presence is required to reach them. and that closing the building forecloses that. Hundreds of formerly registered households, that's how I wrote it in a document. Hundreds of formerly registered households as an argument for keeping a building. I did not call a single one of them. 2.5 years. I want to be precise about that because it's the whole thing. I wrote a 31-page document arguing that those people were reachable and I used them as evidence, and I did not pick up the telephone once. Not once in 2.5 years. Not one call, not one drive out to a house. And I know exactly why, and it isn't laziness, which would be easier. It's that a phone call isn't reportable. There's no box on the form for I drove out to the Kowalczyks and sat on their porch for an hour. It doesn't move the trend line by the October count. It doesn't help. I optimized, that's the word. I'm a 61-year-old parish priest in southern Indiana, and what I did with the last 2.5 years of my working life is I optimized for a rubric. There were 9 meetings, deanery meetings, planning commission meetings, a listening session, 2 visits from the vicar. I went to all of them and I was good in all of them. I'm good in a room, always have been. In the March meeting this year, I got the demographic projection revised on the record, which was a real win. And I drove home that night and I was happy. I want to say the last thing about this, and then I'll get to the water. In June, we got the preliminary determination. It's not final and there's an appeal, but the preliminary determination was merger effective July of 2027. With this building designated as an oratory for weddings and funerals, which is the polite way to say it will be unlocked twice a year for people who used to live here. I filed a formal response on the 11th of July, 19 pages, and on the 15th of August at about 8:45 at night, with the river at 24 feet, I got in my car to drive out here. I need to explain why, because when people hear it, they assume I was being brave about something. The parish up the road took water in their hall on the 13th. I knew that by Thursday night. It was on Facebook. And our hall sits on a rise, and I was almost sure we'd stayed dry, and if we'd stayed dry, then I had something. Deferred maintenance was the strongest card the other side was holding, and here was a 100-year flood that hit them and missed us, and if I had a time-stamped photograph of a dry floor on the night of the crest, that goes straight into the appeal. That's it. That's what I was doing. I want to make sure you heard it because I've told this to 3 people now, and every one of them has tried to make it into something else. I went out into a flood at night past a barricade so that I could photograph a dry floor, so that I could put the photograph in a binder, so that a committee would let me keep a building. And I was calm the entire time. I want that on the record too. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't wrestling with God. I had my phone charged and I'd thought about the angle I wanted.
I want to put one number next to another number because he is about to talk about his parish, and you need the scale of what he is describing. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis has 125 parishes. In one restructuring alone, 12 Catholic parishes in southeast Indiana closed their doors in a single December. That is not a scandal, and I am not presenting it as one. It is arithmetic. Fewer priests, fewer people in the pews, buildings from 1890 that need roofs. Every diocese in the American Midwest has been doing some version of this for 20 years, and there is a whole vocabulary for it. Planning process, pastoral realignment, merger, suppression. Somebody in an office builds a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet has columns for mass attendance and sacramental numbers, and the balance of the building fund and the age of the pastor. And then a man who has spent 34 years in one place finds out that his church is a row in that spreadsheet, and he does what any of us would do. He fights for the row. That is what Father Dale was doing for the last 2.5 years. That is why he was on that road at 9 o'clock at night. Subscribe if you haven't.
County Road 400 East runs from the state road down to the bottoms and then back up past this property. It's 2 lanes, no shoulder, and there's a low spot about 1.25 miles along where a creek goes under it in a box culvert. I have driven that road at a conservative estimate 8,000 times. I want to walk you through that night slowly because the whole thing turns on about 40 seconds, and if I go fast, I'll make myself sound better. First, I have to give you the 4 days before it because the 15th didn't come out of nowhere, and I've noticed that when I skip this part, people think I woke up and decided to be an idiot. Tuesday the 11th was the derecho. That one was frightening. I've been through a lot of weather in this county, and I have never heard anything like the 20 minutes between about 1:30 and 1:50 in the afternoon. The power went at 1:38, and it did not come back until Sunday. Two big silver maples came down in the cemetery, and one of them went across the Hoffmeyer stone, which is from 1894, and broke it in three pieces. And I want you to know that I stood out there in the rain on Tuesday afternoon photographing a broken headstone because that also goes in the file. Wednesday, I did what everybody in this county did. I ran a generator, I cleared a driveway, I checked on the 11 households that don't have a car. Ruth Vandermeer is 86 and lives alone, and her basement had 4 inches in it, and I bailed it with a bucket for 2 hours, and it came back overnight. Thursday it rained again, and the creek started coming up, and Thursday night the parish up the road took water in their hall. Friday the governor's declaration came down, and it was on every radio in the county: statewide disaster emergency. And here is the thing about a statewide disaster emergency, which I did not understand until I was in one. It makes everything sound very large and very far away. It sounds like Indianapolis. It does not sound like your road. Saturday the river crested. So by Saturday night, I had been awake most of 5 days. I'd been running on a generator and cold sandwiches. I had bailed an 86-year-old woman's basement twice. And I had one clean piece of good news in the whole week, which was that our hall was probably dry. I want that on the record, not as an excuse, but as a description. I was not thinking clearly. I want to be careful, though, because I have noticed that I like saying I wasn't thinking clearly, and I've caught myself reaching for it. And the truth is that the specific thing I did at that barricade was not confusion. It was the clearest thing I did all week. It was raining, but it wasn't dramatic. That's the first thing people get wrong. It was a steady rain, the kind we get in April. The dramatic part had been on Tuesday. By Saturday night, it was just wet, and it had been wet for 5 days, and everybody was tired of it. There was a county truck across the road at the top of the grade with the light bar going and two of those orange and white barricades, and a young man in a sheriff's department rain jacket standing next to the truck. I knew him. That's the part I keep having to say. I knew him. I did his grandmother's funeral in 2019. I pulled up and rolled the window down, and he came over. He was polite. He said, "Evening, Father." And he said, "The road's closed at the culvert. We've got water over it. You'll have to go around by the state road. And going around by the state road is 22 minutes. Now here's the 40 seconds. I said, and this is verbatim, I have thought about nothing else for 6 days. I said, I've driven this road for 30 years. Not as an argument. That's what I need you to understand about the tone. It wasn't a debate, and I wasn't asking his permission. It was the thing you say when you're finishing a conversation. I said it the way you'd say it to somebody who's telling you how to get to your own house, and he said, "Well, it's up over the culvert," and I said, "I'll take a look. I'll turn around if it's bad," and he stepped back. He stepped back. He was 26 years old, and I buried his grandmother, and I had a collar on, and he stepped back and let me go around a barricade that he was standing next to for the specific purpose of stopping people from going around it. I have thought a great deal about which of us made the mistake there, and I'm not going to insult him by pretending it was him. I want to be exact about the size of this. He'd have stopped a stranger. I'm almost sure of it. He was doing the job, and he was doing it right up until a man he knew with a white collar on said a sentence in a certain voice. And what stopped him wasn't me being important. Nobody thinks a country pastor is important. It's something else, and it took me until Tuesday in the hospital to get the word for it. He deferred. That's all he'd been raised to. And I have spent 34 years in this county being the kind of man that people defer to, and I never once thought of that as a thing I was doing. I thought of it as being respected, and I liked it, and I want to be honest that I liked it, so I went around. The first 300 yards were nothing, wet road. I remember being slightly annoyed because it looked fine, and I was going to be right. The water at the low spot didn't look like water at first. It looked like the road was shiny. That's the thing nobody tells you, and it's why this kills 40 or 50 people a year in this country. At night, with headlights on it, 6 inches of moving water in a wet road look exactly the same. There's no line. There's no edge where it starts. I felt it before I saw it in the wheel. The steering went light. That's the sensation, not a splash, not a bang. The wheel goes light in your hands like the car has been picked up, which is exactly what has happened. I'd like to tell you I did something smart. What I actually did was hit the brake, which is the worst available option, and the car came around to the right about 90 degrees, and then it was going sideways down the road. Except it wasn't the road anymore, it was the field. 12 inches of moving water will float a car. 12 inches, I knew that. I have said that from the AMBO. I did a whole homily on it in 2021 after a boy in the next county drowned that way, and I used the word hubris in it. And I'm telling you that because if I leave it out, then I'm managing your opinion of me. I said the word hubris from the pulpit about this exact thing, and then I did it 5 years later at 9 o'clock at night with a phone in the cup holder. Car went across the field and hit the fence line. I know it hit the fence line because that's where they found it. On its side, driver's side down, 3/4 of a mile from the culvert. I don't have any memory of any of that. I have the wheel going light, and then I have water in my lap, and then I have almost nothing. I've got two pieces. One is the dome light being on and the water being brown, and the brown coming up over the dash. The other is that the seat belt would not release, and I want to tell you what that's actually like because it isn't like the movies. I wasn't fumbling. I pressed the button. I pressed it correctly, the way I pressed it 10,000 times with my right thumb. And nothing happened because there was about 400 pounds of water leaning on my left side, and the belt was loaded, and a loaded belt does not release. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. It's not panic, and it's not the dark, and it's not the cold. It's that the button doesn't work when there's weight on the strap, and there is always weight on the strap, and every single person this happens to presses the button and thinks it's broken. I got out. I don't know how. The window was down. I'd had it down at the barricade, and I never put it up, and that's the only reason I'm sitting at this table. The state police sergeant told me on Tuesday that if that window had been up, I'd have been in the car when they found it. So the one thing that saved my life is that I was too lazy to put my window up while I was arguing with a deputy about going around a barricade. You can do what you want with that. I've stopped trying to make it mean anything.
Back to him. There is a thing he keeps saying that I want to hold up before we get to the last part, because I think most of you have said a version of it. He keeps saying he was doing the responsible thing. And here is what is strange about that. He was. Every single step of it was responsible. Getting the parish council together was responsible. Building the case for the archdiocese was responsible. Keeping the attendance count honest instead of padding it was responsible. Driving out to a flooded property at night to check whether the water had got into the hall. That was the only irresponsible thing he did in 2.5 years. And even that one, he did for the file. He was going to photograph it for the file. I have listened to a lot of people describe the worst decision of their life. They almost never describe a wild one. They describe the 9th reasonable thing in a row. Back to him for the last part.
Out of the car and into the field is where the account gets thin, and I'm going to tell you honestly which parts I have and which parts I've been told. What I have is being in it. Moving water in a field at night is not a river you can picture. This was a field with corn in it, chest high, and the water was going through the corn, and the corn was still standing, which is the detail that has stayed with me. It wasn't flattened, it was upright, and the water was going through it at about the speed of a man jogging, and I was going with it, sideways through corn. I got hit in the face by corn for what the sergeant estimates was 300 or 400 yards. That's the part nobody would put in a movie because it isn't frightening enough. There was no wave, there was no roar. It was dark and warm and full of plants and moving very fast, and it was completely silent except for me. Twice I got a foot down. Both times it took the foot right back. I'm 61. I want to be realistic about what I actually had available. I'm not a swimmer. I had shoes on and a jacket on, and I never got either of them off. which every water safety person will tell you is the first thing you do, and I didn't do it because your hands are busy the whole time keeping your face up, and there is no moment where you have a spare hand. The fence was barbed wire, 4-strand, on steel posts. It runs along the property line, and it's been there since before I got here. I hit it about chest height, and I stopped, and the water didn't. I need to explain that because it's the thing that nearly killed me, and it's not what people assume. You'd think a fence is good. You caught something. You're not moving anymore. You can hold on. In the first 2 seconds, it is good. But you've stopped, and 40,000 gallons a minute haven't. So the water piles up on you. It comes over your shoulders and it pushes your head down toward the wire, and you're not being carried anymore. You're being pressed, and everything you have goes into the one job of getting your chin above the top strand. I did that for a while. I don't know how long. My arms were through the wire on the far side, hooked over the second strand, and that's how they found me, and that's why my forearms look like this, and I lost it slowly. That's the honest word, not suddenly. Each time my chin went under, it stayed under a little longer, and there's a stretch in the middle where I was still deciding to lift, and my neck simply wasn't doing it anymore. And there's a bad half minute where you understand exactly what's happening, and you're still completely awake for it. It's not a panic. I keep telling people that, and they don't believe me. It's arithmetic. You can feel the number going down, and there's no drama in it at all. There's one more piece of it I'll give you because a doctor in Muncie explained it to me on the Monday, and I'd never heard it in my life, and I think people should know. I asked him why I stopped being able to lift my head, because that's the thing I couldn't get past. I'm not a weak man. I've carried more than my own weight up a ladder within the last year, and I could not lift my own head 12 inches. And he said, you weren't lifting your head. You were lifting your head plus the column of water on top of you, plus the drag of the current on your whole body against a fence, and you'd been doing it for some number of minutes with no rest between repetitions, and you were doing it while breathing about half of what you needed. He said, it isn't strength. He said, nobody has that. He said, the men who survive that are the ones who get an arm hooked over something in the first 30 seconds, and you did do that, and that's why we're talking. And then he said the thing I've thought about since. He said, most of the people we lose in this are not weak, and they are not stupid. They are people who were fine for 11 minutes and then were not. Fine for 11 minutes and then not. I've been turning that over because it's the same shape as the rest of it. Nothing goes wrong at the moment you'd point to. Every individual second is survivable. It's the accumulation, and there's no alarm that goes off when the accumulation crosses over. And by the time you can feel it, the thing you'd have needed to do about it was several minutes back. That's the flood, and that's also, as far as I can tell, 34 years. I don't have the last part. I have my chin going under and being very tired and thinking about the boiler. I want to say that plainly because it's the true thing and it's grotesque. The last thought I have from the 15th of August is about the boiler in that building, whether the appeal would survive it. That's the last thing that was in my head at 61 years old, drowning in a cornfield. Not God, not my mother, not one of the 91 households. A boiler. Then the other part, which I'll get to. Here's what I've been told about the outside of it, and I've gotten it from 3 people, so I think it's right. A farmer named, I'm not going to use his name, he's had enough people calling him, a man who owns the ground on the other side of that fence went out at first light because he wanted to see his corn. He found the car first on its side and he called it in, and then he walked the fence line because that's what you do, and he found me about 20 yards further along. He said afterward that he thought I was a coat. The county EMS were 19 minutes out because of the roads. He didn't wait. He got me off the wire, which took him a while because my arms were hooked through it and my whole weight was on them, and he did compressions on the bank of a drainage ditch in the dark. He's 68 years old. He learned CPR in 1984 for a job at a grain elevator and had never used it. 19 minutes. That's what's on the run sheet. And the ER doctor in Muncie told me the number is soft because nobody knows exactly when I went under, and it could be more. They got me back in the field, not in the ambulance and not at the hospital, in the field before EMS arrived on a ditch bank by a man who wanted to look at his corn. I've been to see him once. It went badly. I went out there with something prepared because, of course, I did. I'm me. And I got about a sentence and a half into it, and he said, well, and then he stood there, and then he said, you want a coffee? So we had a coffee, and we talked about the corn, which is a total loss, about 40 acres of it, and I left. I'm going back. I don't have a plan for what to say, and I've decided that's correct. The other thing I'll tell you about the physical side, and then I'll stop, because this is the part where these stories usually get self-indulgent. I have 140 stitches, mostly forearms, and one across the jaw. I have aspiration pneumonia, which is what you get when you breathe in floodwater, and floodwater in a farm county is not water, it's whatever was on the ground, and they had me on 2 antibiotics for 5 days. I have 4 broken ribs from the compressions, which is normal, and which the doctor told me twice was normal, because apparently everybody asks. I was in Muncie until Wednesday, and the number kept coming while I was in there. 6 dead when I went in, 7 when I came out. And I lay in that bed and read the list on my phone every morning, and there is a man in Delaware County who did exactly what I did, and he is not doing an interview at a folding table, and I don't have anything to say about that that isn't obscene. So I'm going to say the only honest thing, which is that it isn't a reason. There's no reason. I got a window that was down.
While he was in a bed in Muncie, the state started adding up what the water had done. And I want to give you those numbers too, because they are the other half of what he is describing. At the peak, 300,000 customers in Indiana had no power. Across the line in Ohio, more than 130,000. In Kentucky, over 100,000 on the 11th alone. On the 20th, 9 days in. 68,000 customers in Lake County, Indiana, were still dark, and some of them are being told the 25th. A bridge on Hazeldale Parkway in Carmel was partly washed away, and it very nearly took a wastewater main with it. The Whitewater Valley Railroad is looking at millions in repairs. And then the money started moving, the way it does. On the 16th, the Indianapolis Colts gave $125,000, and Pacers Sports and Entertainment gave the same. On the 17th, American Electric Power Ohio gave $150,000 to the Red Cross. That same day, the governor announced a relief fund that pays out $5,000 to an individual. On the 18th, an outfit called Cultivate Food Rescue sent 6,000 meals into Indianapolis. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis said its prayers were with the flood and storm victims, and Catholic Charities went to work on recovery, which is what Catholic Charities does and does well. I am not being sarcastic about any of that. Every one of those things is good, and every one of those things helped somebody this week. I am listing them because I want you to notice the shape of it. All of it is measurable. Dollars, meals, customers restored, feet of crest. It is a very American way to respond to a disaster, and it is genuinely effective. And it is also the only language the institution he works for has left for describing whether he has done a good job. He is about to tell you what he was asked instead. Subscribe if you haven't. This is the last part.
All right, the other part, 4 things before I describe it, or you'll hear it wrong. 1, I don't know what it was. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I went somewhere. A neurologist would tell you my brain was hypoxic and it produced something out of the only material it had, which is 34 years of church. And I want to say clearly that that explanation is completely available to me, and I haven't rejected it. I've thought about it every day. 2, there was no tunnel, there was no light at the end of anything, and nobody in white came for me. I know those accounts. I've listened to a couple hundred of them at bedsides, and I believed a good number of them, and this was not that. 3, it wasn't frightening. That's not the same as saying it was nice. 4, what I'm about to describe is a counting problem, and I'm a man who spent 2.5 years on a spreadsheet. I'm aware. It's the first thing I thought when I woke up, and it's why I didn't tell anybody for 3 days. Here's what there was. There was a field, not that field, a different one, and I want to be careful because everybody wants it to be that field, and it wasn't. It was open, and it was flat, and it went further than it should have, and the light was the light you get about 40 minutes before a storm in July, that flat, shadowless yellow-gray light where everything looks very sharp and there's no sun anywhere, and there were sheep in it. I'd like to say something about that before I go on. I am from Indiana. I have never had anything to do with sheep in my life. There are maybe 4 flocks in this county, and they're hobby operations. If my brain was going to hand me an agricultural image, it would have handed me hogs or corn, which I'd just been in. I got sheep. Make of that what you want. I've made about 9 different things of it, and none of them stuck. They were spread across the field a long way, hundreds of them, and they were quiet and they were fine. Grazing, not distressed, not going anywhere, but not lost either. Just there, doing what they do in that flat light. And I stood there and I looked at them and I felt something I have to describe accurately, even though it doesn't reflect well on me. I felt satisfaction because they were all there. That was my read immediately, without counting. They're all here. Nothing's gone. This is intact. And I had a very specific feeling that I recognized from my own life, which is the feeling you get at the end of an audit when the numbers reconcile. That's what I felt, reconciled. And then I understood the way you understand things there, not by being told there was no voice, there was no sound at all. I understood that they were all there because I was only looking at the ones that were there. I want to try to say this properly. It's not that I looked and then counted and found some missing. It's that I became aware that the field had an edge out past where I could see, and that whatever was past the edge was not in the picture I was looking at, and had never been in any picture I had ever looked at in 34 years. The ones in front of me weren't a flock. They were a sample, and I'd been standing there doing a satisfaction on a sample. Then the question came, and people always want to know what the voice sounded like. There was no voice. It's a question the way it's a question when you walk into a room and see something, and the question is already inside you before there are any words on it. It was, where are the rest of them? 5 words, not even words. And I answered. That's the part I haven't told anybody. I did answer immediately, and my answer was a number. I said 319, because I knew that number, 410 households minus 91. I've had that number in a binder for 2.5 years, and it was sitting right there at the front of my head. And I produced it the way you produce a figure in a meeting when somebody asks you a question you've prepared for. And I want you to understand nothing happened. Nothing rebuked me. There was no thunder. It was worse than that. The number just sat there in that field being completely useless, and I heard it the way you hear your own voice on a recording. And I understood that I had been asked where they were, and I had answered with how many. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what I've got. I don't have a message. I have that. I came back on the ditch bank. Not in a hospital, not in an ambulance. On the ground with a 68-year-old farmer's hands on my chest. And the first thing I did, apparently, I have no memory of this, and 2 people have told me, is I tried to sit up and take a phone out of my pocket. My phone was in a cornfield somewhere in Delaware County. I was reaching for it anyway. Even then, I was going to document something. Here's what I've done since, and it's small, and it's the only reason I'm doing this at all. I haven't resigned, I'm not going to, and I want to be clear about something else. I have not withdrawn the appeal. I'm going to lose it. The water settled that faster than the committee was going to. But I'm not withdrawing it because those 91 households deserve somebody who fought to the end. And pulling it now so I can look humble in a video would be the most cowardly thing I've ever done. What I did was Monday morning, I pulled the registers again. 92, 93, 94, all the way through. And I started a list in a legal pad by hand of everyone who was on there and isn't now and isn't dead. I'm at 41 names. It's going to take months. Some of them I'll never find, and some of them are in Arizona, and I've called 6. I'll tell you how the 6 went, because if I don't, you'll assume something nice happened. 1 was a wrong number. 2 didn't pick up. 1 picked up, and it was the daughter, and her father died in 2019, which I should have known and didn't. And that call was about 4 minutes of me apologizing. 1 was a man named Gary. I'll use his first name. He said I could. Who I last saw in about 2008, and he was perfectly friendly. and he has no interest whatsoever in coming back, and he told me so in the first 90 seconds. And then we talked for 50 minutes anyway, about his knees and his boy and the plant. 50 minutes. And one told me to go to hell, which she was entitled to, and I'm not going to explain her reasons on camera. So that's the score. 6 calls. 1 wrong number, 2 no answers, 1 apology, 1 50-minute conversation with a man who is never coming back, and 1 go to hell. Nothing about that is going to help my appeal. Not 1 minute of it goes in a binder. There's no box on the form for it. That's the only part of the last 34 years I'm sure was the job.
There is one line Father Dale keeps coming back to, and I want to put it in its place before we finish. Luke chapter 15, verse 4. In the King James, it goes like this. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost, until he find it? 99 and 1. And the instruction in it, the actual instruction, is to leave the 99 and go. So let's say plainly what this text does not say. It does not say that a flood is a judgment on anything. 7 people died in Indiana last week doing ordinary things, sleeping in a house with a tree next to it, driving to work on a state highway, having a heart attack on the wrong side of a closed road. Anyone who turns that into a message has understood nothing. It does not say that buildings do not matter. He raised the money for that roof from people who did not have it. A church that leaks is a church that says something to the people sitting in it, and he was right about that, and he was right about it for 34 years. It does not say that the 99 are the enemy. They are not. They are the ones who stayed. They are the reason there is anything left to fight for. And it is a strange kind of cruelty that this parable gets preached at the faithful as though showing up were a failure of imagination. And it does not say that a man who spent 2.5 years defending a building was wasting his time. He was not. He was doing his job. That is the part that will not stop bothering me. What the text does say is that the shepherd counts to 99 and then notices the gap and then goes out into the wilderness after the gap. Counting is in there. Counting is the first thing he does. But in the parable, the counting is what sends him out the door. And in the story you have just heard, the counting was the door. One more thing about the river. The White River crested at Anderson higher than it did in 1913. That flood in 1913 is the one Indiana measures everything against. It killed around 200 people in this state, and it is the reason the levees exist at all. It stood as the record for 113 years. It stopped being the record on the 15th of August, 2026, at about 4 in the afternoon, while a 61-year-old man was lying in a bed in Muncie with a tube in his throat, not knowing yet that he had lived. Father Dale has not written to the Archbishop. The building is still going to close. The water made that decision faster than the spreadsheet was going to. What he did instead, on Monday, was pull the parish register and start making a different list. And he says the different list has 41 names on it so far, and that all 41 are people who used to be in that building and are not anymore. He has managed to telephone 6 of them. If you made it this far, subscribe and tell me in the comments about one person you have not seen in church or anywhere else in over a year, and whether you ever asked them why. Take care of yourselves.